Hello everyone and welcome back to Curious Kellen. My name is Kellen and today I want to talk to you about Dutch babies. Here we go. Now if you were thinking about getting recipe ideas for the wonderful delicious treat also known as a Dutch baby, you have come to the wrong place and I recommend you go check out Martha Stewart's website for that. Today what I'd like to talk to you about instead is actual Dutch babies and the way that they learn Dutch while they're growing up. So a common misconception about language is that we have to teach children how to speak a certain way. But this isn't really how children learn to speak a language. They're just picking it up by hearing other people speak it. They're internalizing the rules of the language. They're internalizing the vocabulary until they're able to start producing it. Part of what we want to do as linguists is understand how that learning process works. At what stages are they learning certain things? In this example today, we're going to be talking about Dutch children and how they are acquiring language, particularly with regards to final devoicing. Now I'll explain what that means. The final devoicing that we see in Dutch can be seen right here in this example. We have two words, it means dog, and the first word is pronounced hond, and the other one is pronounced honda. Please excuse my Dutch pronunciation. I can speak German a lot better than I can Dutch. In fact, I speak no Dutch, but we'll roll with it. So you can see in the first word, even though it ends in a D, it's being pronounced as a T, hond. But in the plural form, this means dogs. The first one just means dog in the singular. In the plural form, honde, we are hearing a D. So even though there is supposed to be a D at the end of this word, it is devoiced, or it turns into a T at the end of the word. Now this concept is known as neutralization, because in Dutch, the sound t and the sound d are both contrastive, which means they can make a difference in meaning. So say there's a word toe and a word do. Toe and do would theoretically have different meanings if they were words in the language because the sound t and d are contrastive. But what we see here is that contrast is being neutralized. So if you had a word that ended in a D like this, hond, but you also had a word that ended in a T that was pronounced the exact same way, but had a different meaning, the difference would be neutralized because they would both be pronounced as hond. A recent study tested Dutch children to see how they understood this process of final devoicing. And the way that they did that was through a thing called a reverse WUG test. What is a WUG test? This is a classic linguistics experiment that was done on English-speaking children, and it goes like this. This right here is a WUG. Now there is another one. There are two of them. Now there are two blank. And the children would have to figure out what goes in that blank. Now, I think most of us would quickly say, WUGs. We have two WUGs. And this shows that we understand the rule of how to make a singular noun into a plural. And results showed that English-speaking children knew how to use this rule. They would almost always say WUGs for this. Now, the reverse of this is to say, here are two WUGs. Now there's one of them. There's one blank. And we would say WUG. A study was done on Dutch-speaking children from 2.5 to 3.5 years of age, asking them what the singular form of the word sladen is. Now, as we saw with the hond, honde example, the D at the end of hond was being turned into a t. So if we have the plural form sladen, then the singular form that we would expect would be slat, because the d would be devoiced in the final position. Now, what this test was really looking for was if these children have a concept of how final devoicing works, at least in this age range. Obviously, native Dutch speakers do this, and we wanted to see, do children learn this rule at this age, or is this something that's too complicated for them? when they hear the word sladen, they should easily be able to produce slat. But this is not exactly the results that we see in this test. Dutch-speaking children in this age range from 2.5 to 3.5 actually experience a lot of difficulty with the final devoicing rule. So we might suggest that they don't quite have a robust knowledge of the way that this rule works yet. One thing that was mentioned in the test, however, is that when children heard the word slaten, it was easier for them to produce the singular slat. But when they heard the word sladen, it was harder for them to come up with the term slat. Because in both cases, whether it's slaten or sladen, in the singular, it would both be slat. But children had a more difficult time going from sladen to slat than from slaten to slat. The reason that this is also important is because of the idea of phonotactics, which essentially says what sounds are and aren't allowed in a language and in what environments they're able to appear in. The idea is that children learn these rules very young. Just like what we saw with the English WUG test, children were reliably able to produce the plural form of a brand new word that they had never seen before, and so we think that the same thing would be possible for Dutch children, but we see that this is not the case. What this study suggests is that phonotactics aren't learned at such an early age, but are rather acquired over time. Some constraints may be learned earlier on and some later on, as we see with the Dutch final devoicing rule. In other words, Dutch children were not able to produce the sounds that we expected them to be able to produce. This challenges the idea of phonotactics and at what age children are learning these phonotactic constraints for their language. There may be certain constraints that are learned earlier on in life and some that are learned later on and require a lot more effort to fully internalize. Well, there you have it, folks. Now you know just a little bit more about how children learn and acquire language. If you're curious to learn more about this study, I have put a link to the article that describes what happened in this study in the description below, so feel free to check that out. And the next time you find yourself at brunch with a friend who's ordering a Dutch baby, you'll have some interesting linguistic facts to share with them. Thank you, and have a great day.